U.S. and Canada trade talks collapsed, and new U.S. tariffs are kicking in over the weekend.
The Canada and America trade conflict is getting serious. Canada has been America's closest neighbor, its biggest customer, and the country quietly keeping a huge chunk of the American economy running. America has been the place Canada sells almost everything it makes, and now the two of them are barely even speaking to each other. Washington has put 50% tariffs on a long list of Canadian goods. Ottawa has promised to match them dollar for dollar. Trade talks collapsed at midnight with nothing scheduled afterwards, and the president has told Canada it will be treated like a state no longer. Ontario is openly talking about pulling the plug on the electricity and the critical minerals flowing south, and Ontario alone powers 1.5 million American homes and businesses. So the real question is how far this actually goes, because there is a version of this story where Canada simply stops being America's partner. And the numbers coming out of Canada suggest that version has already quietly started, which means Canada might genuinely walk away from the United States, and Donald Trump might turn out to be the reason it happened. The 50% tariff is real, but it lands on one specific slice of what Canada sells, not on everything. That distinction is the whole story. What actually took effect was a 50% tariff on roughly $20 billion of Canadian goods, which comes out to about 5% of what Canada ships south in a year. And the list is oddly specific. Hockey sticks, wine and liquor, cement and building materials, appliances, certain clothing, even tongue depressors. Steel and aluminum, meanwhile, have already been sitting at 50% for over a year, and copper joined that list soon after. The broader tariff, covering most other Canadian goods, has been a different, lower rate the entire time, and anything qualifying under the North American trade agreement has largely been exempt. So when you see a headline saying Trump put 50% on Canada, understand what that really means. Specific sectors, specific baskets of goods, stacked on top of each other over many months. Not one giant number dropped on an entire country overnight. The figure is accurate. The impression it leaves behind is not. One number, one narrow list, and an enormous gap between the two. Canada and America stopped negotiating minutes before a midnight deadline, and that collapse is what triggered the 50% tariffs. Both sides had spent weeks at the table. Days earlier, Donald Trump had posted that the two countries had a deal. Then the terms shifted right at the end. Mark Carney said the United States asked for too much and offered too little, called the new demands uneconomic and unfair, and walked out. Hours later, the tariffs took effect at 12:01 in the morning. Carney called the whole thing a miscalculation. He also revealed Canada had been ready to draw its remaining counter-tariffs on steel, aluminum, and automobiles if Washington lowered its own, and that the real sticking point was what the Americans wanted on cars. Then he announced Canada would match the tariffs dollar for dollar, targeting American steel, dairy, appliances, farm equipment, pulp and paper, and electronics. No further talks were scheduled. Two governments sharing the longest border on Earth walked out of the same room and did not book another meeting. Trust took real damage that night, and trust is not something you can tariff back into place. Doug Ford already put a surcharge on American electricity once, and it lasted about half a day. That is the part nobody mentions. Ontario actually did it. Ford added 25% to the cost of power flowing into Minnesota, Michigan, and New York. It was signed, it was real, it was in motion. Then Washington said it would double the metal tariffs in response, and by that same afternoon, Ford had suspended the surcharge. The Americans stepped back too, and the whole episode was finished before most people had even read about it. Since then, Ford has kept the idea alive. He has talked about stopping nickel shipments. He has said he would cut the power with a smile on his face. He has told reporters that everything is on the table and that Canadians are ready to absorb real economic pain rather than fold. But saying something and doing it are very different things, and the record so far is one attempt reversed the same afternoon. Worth remembering before assuming the next round goes any differently. Ontario has the loudest voice in this argument and the weakest hand to play it with. Alberta and Saskatchewan have both refused to use energy as leverage, and that is why a national cutoff keeps not happening. Here is the problem with the headline. Ontario is one province. The oil is in Alberta. The potash is in Saskatchewan. And both of those premiers have said no, publicly and repeatedly. Alberta's Danielle Smith has called cutting off energy a non-starter and too dangerous to even discuss, and she has pushed Ontario to walk its own talk back. Saskatchewan's Scott Moe has refused to put potash or energy on the table at all, arguing negotiators should stay parked in Washington instead. Quebec has not been on board with energy retaliation either. So what you actually have is one very loud premier in the province with the most to lose on automobiles, offering to do something the provinces controlling the oil and the fertilizer have already ruled out. Canada as a country has not decided to cut anybody off. Ottawa is running this response, and Ottawa has stuck strictly to tariffs. One province keeps offering, the rest of the country keeps declining, and nothing moves. Canada supplies almost all of the natural gas America imports, and that one fact explains why this dispute matters so much. Mark Carney laid the numbers out himself after the talks collapsed. Alongside the gas, Canada provides the overwhelming majority of imported American electricity and roughly 60% of imported crude oil. Ontario and Quebec help keep the lights on in Minnesota, Michigan, New York, Maine, and Vermont. Then there is fertilizer. More than 80% of the potash American farmers depend on comes out of Saskatchewan, and the only real alternatives are Russia and Belarus. Canada also supplies about a third of American uranium and roughly half its aluminum. So the leverage is not imaginary. It is enormous, and both governments know exactly where it sits. The genuinely interesting part is that Canada has chosen not to touch it. Everything Ottawa has actually done has been tariffs, matched dollar for dollar, and nothing beyond that. Restraint is a strange thing to build a headline around, but that is what is happening. A country holding that much power over its neighbor and choosing to sit on it is the real headline.
They are smack in the middle of this trade fight now because the new 50% tariff that the U.S. is imposing on Canadian exports.
Donald Trump says every Canadian car, truck, and auto part will face a 50% tariff starting in 2027, and he announced it in a social media post. That came 2 days after the newest tariffs took effect. He wrote that Canada has been ripping off the United States for years, that the trade gap between the two countries is not sustainable, and that anything built in America pays nothing at all. Then he finished with a line that tells you everything about the current mood. Canada will be treated like a state no longer. Tariffs on cars currently sit at 25%, so this would double them, and auto parts had not been covered at all until now. Here is the wrinkle almost nobody mentions. Trade lawyers point out that this money is collected at the American border, from American dealerships and American buyers. As one put it, the first invoice usually lands in a Michigan showroom, not in Ottawa. American drivers are likely to feel this long before any Canadian factory does. A tariff on Canadian cars is, in practice, a price increase for Americans buying them. Canada is already selling less to America than at any point since the 1980s, and nobody had to cut anything off for that to happen. This is the real story underneath all of it. The share of Canadian exports going to the United States fell from roughly 76% to under 72% in a single year. Meanwhile, Canadian exports to everywhere else jumped more than 17% and hit a record high. Canadians stopped visiting too. Trips to the United States dropped by about a quarter, something like 10 million fewer visits, and billions of dollars once spent in American hotels and restaurants simply went elsewhere. Ottawa signed fresh trade agreements with Indonesia, the UAE, and Ecuador, tore down internal barriers between its own provinces, and became the first non-European member of a major European defense program. No announcement, no cutoff, just a country quietly rebuilding its economy so that it needs the one next door a little less every single year. That is what walking away really looks like. Slow, documented, and already well underway.